Hey guys, Gareth here from Intent Architect and recording this for you guys from a little town called Aubernay in France. In this video, I'm going to take you guys through the latest release of Intent Architect, the version 5.1. But before we jump into the demo, I think it's worth taking a quick step back to touch on the bigger picture of this new world of AI-powered development and exactly where Intent Architect fits into this future of software engineering. So as you guys can imagine, we talk to dev teams all over the world. And what we're seeing in the industry is that AI is undoubtedly accelerating development and sometimes by a lot, right? So, as an example, our team developed and shipped this 5.1 release in about 4 weeks, probably something that would have taken us about 4 months to do last year. So, of course, we're using Intent Architect and AI internally. But what we're also seeing is that for most teams, as they accelerate and their systems are growing, it's becoming harder and harder for them to maintain the quality and consistency of their code bases, and the cognitive debt is also growing exponentially. So, one of the challenges that you guys will probably be very familiar with is that while AI is great at producing code quickly, it often makes decisions that don't 100% align with the broader architecture and standards, and often makes inappropriate design choices, and then just builds on top of them without ever looking back, right? And each of these moments, when stacked and repeated over and over, and you extrapolate this out, this is compounding technical debt faster than we've ever seen before. And if you mix this in with the over engineering tendencies of AI, the cognitive debt, and the increased burden of code reviews, we see a trajectory where many of the systems will deteriorate to a point where the engineering teams will struggle to maintain them downstream, even with AI. So now more than ever, the engineering teams that we're talking to and that we're meeting are looking for and needing a system to protect against this architectural drift, this entropy and cognitive debt. And that's exactly where Intent Architect fits in. So our foundation is in architectural enforcement, visual design, and the AI native integration that we built into the heart of the platform. And it's essentially evolving Intent Architect into what we're calling an architecture driven AI development platform. And it's essentially a way for us to give teams the ability to maintain visibility of their systems while ensuring the consistent implementation of their architecture as they scale AI across their teams and systems. So, as we look at what's new in 5.1, I'd like you guys to just keep this context in mind, right? These improvements are all aligned to a vision to help teams build their mission critical software systems with enterprise grade quality at scale in the new world of AI powered development. And on that note, let's jump right in. Right, so let's begin by opening up a sample solution, which we can use to showcase a lot of the new features. So one thing I could do here is I just want to load up our AI chat window over here so that I could take you guys through what we've done that's new inside of our AI systems. So very importantly, if we take a look at our providers, what you guys can see here is that we've gone and extended the provider list to include pretty much any option that teams could want to use. So we've got direct GitHub Copilot integration. We've got ACP connectors to Claude Code. So this uses your Claude Code subscription directly inside of Intent Architect. Same for Codex, same for the GitHub Copilot CLI. So these options basically make it that you can have a seamless any AI experience within Intent Architect. This is very important. You guys can also see that we've also included ways to turn these off. If you're like us, some of us, we have many, many providers. We don't want all of these providers to be connected all at once or show up in the list of different models. And so you can turn all of that off if you'd like. You can enable them and disable them at your discretion. The second thing that is definitely worth touching on is we've actually done quite a lot of enhancements and improvements to our MCP. We've improved the tooling in the background and made things a lot better. If you guys are driving your systems outside of Intent Architect through, for example, Claude Code in the terminal or through directly inside of VS Code or whatever the case is, you'll definitely want to get your MCP installed. Super easy. Just as an example on Claude Code, you can just copy this command, paste it into the terminal, and it'll wire up the MCP for you pretty much instantly. We've got all the different options here. So if you head over to VS Code or to Cursor or whatever the case is, you could just place in your configuration and it'll just start to work. And then finally, we've also done some improvements here with regards to the MCP server connectors that we can provide inside of Intent Architect. So we now support the OAuth authentication of MCP servers, and that was something that we didn't have in 5, but we do have it in this version. So if you want to connect it up to your Jira or your Confluence or whatever the case is, you could go ahead and just connect up your MCP, either from a global server perspective or from a solution perspective, whichever suits you guys, right? So quite a few enhancements that we brought in just in terms of the configuration and the providers. The second thing that I can point out here for you guys is that we can also pop out this window if we need to. So if we want to give ourselves a bit more real estate, we can pop it out. You can see there's a lot of just different chats that I've had over here. If I click on any of them, it can show us some of the changes that happened, and we can click through these and it'll take us directly to those changes in our diagrams. And if we want to just move this back into the main window, we can click this button over here and it'll flick it back in there and we can continue our work, create a new chat or whatever else we need to do. By the way, as you guys can see over here, I've got the Claude Code options and I've got the GitHub Copilot options. So through whatever integration you guys would find your different models over here, and you can go and select, for example, Claude Code default. If you're running a premium account, that'll be Opus. If you're running a standard, I think it'll be Sonnet. So you could basically run this from whichever angle you like, any AI provider and your system, you can use it within Intent Architect. The second thing is, of course, we can pop these things out. Just as a reminder, you can also pop out these windows. So you can move this to a new window and you can move this across to a different desktop or whatever the case is, if you want to maximize your real estate. And so that's something that we're going to constantly be expanding upon, is the ability to pop in and out whatever you need within the Intent Architect ecosystem. With this next iteration here has basically brought this into the AI modeling systems. Okay, guys, so that's the first thing I want to take you through. The next thing I want to show you guys here is that what we've also brought into Intent Architect is direct Git integration. There's several reasons for this, and let's just give ourselves a bit more space here. There's several reasons for this. The first is that this is it's very, very convenient to be able to check in our code and be able to see the different changes within the system. So what happened in buyers, for example, the buyer configuration, what are these different changes? We can go check all of those directly in here, of course, with our changes from the software factory. And so that was the one side of it, but that wasn't the main reason we brought this in. We brought this in for a reason I'm going to show you guys very importantly in a minute. But one thing I can just touch on here is, while we are looking at this Git integration, we do have all of the controls for, you could say, about 80% of the work, 90% of the work that we typically do with our Git, merging branches, switching to branches. The things that we can't do at this stage directly through the Intent Architect Git systems is we didn't set up a system for managing merge conflicts, right? So that you'll have to do in a different system, but pretty much everything else we've got covered for the most part, right? There's a lot of different features that exist in Git that we haven't brought in, but for the ones that we found ourselves using on a continuous basis, this is just here for your guys' convenience, and you only need to hop out of Intent Architect and go into a merge conflict resolution path or whatever the case is with a different tool in that circumstance that is actually happening. Now, we are going to support that in the future, probably just using AI to drive the resolutions rather than pushing everything into three-way merges, because that is how we as a team find ourselves actually dealing with things. Is when we have merges, we're actually just passing it on to an AI agent to go through those changes and figure out what's going on over there and basically merge the two together, and then we check what comes out the other side of that merge. All right, so that's just a little bit of the Git integration directly through the software factory execution. One of the main reasons we brought this Git integration in is you'll see that there are two new options that are available, or two little icons, buttons that are available now inside of our designers. The first is our Diff baseline. So previously, if we click on last save over here, previously, if you go and you create an entity in Intent Architect, so this is V5, and we have some new entity, we add an attribute. We add an attribute to order lines, for example, and maybe we go and rename name to name number 2. If we push save, and we can also see in V5.1 here, we've got, this is showing up in our designers too. This is great because this shows us exactly what has changed. And we've also got here in the toolbar, we've also got an indicator in the gutter of the toolbar to show us that there are changes, and we can scroll to exactly where those changes are, right? Now, the thing with version 5 is that if we pushed save, all of that would disappear, right? And so one of the main reasons we wanted Git integration is, firstly, to be able to compare constantly against the git head. So if I switch this over to git head, it's going to show us those same changes even after we've saved. And this is incredibly useful from an AI perspective because as you are building out with AI, so whether you're prompting or you're putting specs into Intent Architect, which a lot of teams are doing, by the way, is you can take your specifications and you can quite simply drop them, drag them and drop them into the Intent Architect input over here and say, please model out my domain for this. And it'll go ahead and do that. You can follow that up with a please model out the services. It'll go ahead and do that. And then you can fill in all the blanks with the AI agents to make sure that your system is actually built completely. That, or like a lot of teams do, is you can prompt your requirements in here and ask it to do work for you, right? So both options are completely valid. But we want to be able to see what the AI is actually doing, even if it's saving these changes for us as it runs a software factory and we're building up things over time. We want to be able to, at a glance, just go and see what did it actually do. And this is something that we find very, very useful ourselves because one of the things that we find ourselves constantly correcting the AI on is in the design decisions, right? So sometimes we see it's lumping design decisions together, or we see that it's immediately we can see that it's over engineering, and we can just steer it away from that very, very easily because it is so crystal clear exactly what's happening. All right, so we can go ahead and delete these changes if we want, or whatever the case is, or just undo them. Let me just go back and actually make sure that's a real delete. And there we go. We can go change that. We'll just change this back to name over there. All right, so if we push save, then that's all back to normal. What I can do now is I can also show you guys another aspect of the change management, which is very, very key. And this is one of the big features that we really wanted to bring in as part of this release, is the ability for us to see historically how our models have changed in a model-centric diff, right? So here we can see our Git log that we've got for this particular project. And this here, if I click on this button here, it'll show only commits that touch this designer. So if we click on that, it's pretty much all of the work that we've done here is touching this designer. But this is very useful because this will just strip out and filter out anything that was just purely code related work or work that was related to other designers. This will filter it down to just work on this specific designer. And then what we can do is we can click on any particular commit, and we could start off by saying, please compare this with my working tree. It'll start up a new tab over here, which is essentially a read-only tab. And if we zoom out over here, we can see at a glance all the places that has changed things through the system, right? So we can see here that all of these comments were brought in. We can see that there were changes to the operations and to the attributes all throughout. So for example, on our buyer over here, we can also see that there's a gutter, right, of modifications that is highlighting for us over here. And if we want to see these changes, we can click on them. So for example, if we click on this family name over here, we can see that it was renamed from last name to family name in between that commit and where our working tree is right now, and that the maximum length was set to 50. So from null to 50. Right. And so we can see all of these different changes over here. We can see that on the email address, it was basically had the email stereotype added, and that the max length was set to 255. So we can go through the system and understand exactly what changed between that commit and where we are in our working tree at the moment. We can also do this, by the way, by just right clicking and saying comparing with parent. So this will show us now what has changed in the system between the previous commit and the current commit that we clicked on. And here we can see that it added in all of these different operations, and it added in these different options here for the status. And we can, of course, see that directly through the tree view too. So very, very useful for us to answer questions. What happened on that commit? What did this branch bring in? Especially when you're dealing with a team environment where there are many developers working on the project and one wants to go back and understand these changes. This is one of the main reasons we brought this feature in, is that this is something that many teams have said to us, we need to be able to answer this so that we can check that the design of the system is heading in the right direction. And then finally, if we come back here, we can, of course, do things like selecting two different commits and asking it to compare between these commits, right? So if we compare between those two commits, we can see at a glance here that the only real changes that came in was bringing in the return and the refund entities over here. We've got some different statuses. And so just to give ourselves a bit more real estate over there, we can see exactly what's happened over here as part of this commit. And that was really between this add refunds return and this update over here, right? So guys, this is just one of the core features that we brought in as part of this release. There are a few other things that we have brought in, which I'll touch on very, very quickly. So the one thing that we've also brought in here is an option for different persistence So right now, the persistence of the way that the intent architect metadata is being saved into our repositories is as XML, right? With which is what we're calling V2, right? So you can actually see the progression over here, but we've added 3 additional options. We've added a V2 of YAML, right, which is exactly the same structure and format as to what the XML was persisting, but it's switching it over to YAML. And then we've added in a V3, which is essentially doing quite an aggressive strip out of any fields or properties that are the default, right, or essentially redundant. And so just to give you an idea, if I switch over to XML, but in V3 over here, and I say save, and we go back to our git log, we can take a look and see here all of the different ways that this is now changing things. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit over here. What you'll notice, by the way, is it's removing all of these visuals from our diagrams, and it's moving them into actually named visuals inside of our diagram. So that was one thing that we wanted to change with V3. And the other things that you guys can see is that if I click on, for example, a class for one of our entities, the buyer, for example, just giving it a second here to load. I think my machine's taking a bit of strain with all these changes over here. There we are. All right, you could see just based on how many XML attributes are being stripped out here, just how aggressive this is in terms of removing any unneeded metadata, right? So this is all about cleaning up a lot of the metadata so that there is less chances of conflicts, etc. And so you can go through and you can see that across the board over here, it's quite extensively removing anything that we can consider a default. There is no loss of data, though. Just want to be 100% clear. There's no loss of data. Now, one thing that I could just mention before you decide to just switch this over is, of course, if you do decide to switch this over, we wouldn't suggest doing it right away as part of this 5.1 release. We suggest doing this once the whole team is using 5.1 and you guys are fully comfortable on the new version of Intent Architect so that you can see, so that you feel comfortable that you do not need to move back to version 5 or previously, because the V3 XML or YAML, and in fact YAML for V2 even of this persistence format will not be compatible with previous versions of Intent Architect. So we would recommend just delaying the using of these, but if you do plan to switch over to YAML, YAML's very, very nice. It is a little bit less noisy and verbose, and so you could switch over to YAML too. We didn't feel like a JSON option was actually viable because really it would just be an in-between between XML and YAML. And so we really see a lot of teams moving probably towards the YAML format, but we're keeping the XML intact for the time being until we're more certain of which direction teams would like to go. All right, guys. So there's lots of other little things that we've done here. I think there's just for the sake of time, I'm going to stop there, and you guys can go check out the release notes. Lots of little things that have come in as part of this release. But please go let us know what you guys think. If you guys are enjoying the release, you guys can let us know by just giving us your feedback. Please also, if you are not enjoying some of these features or feel like that we are going in a direction which you feel like there is a better way, please also let us know. Right, that's really great feedback for us. We really love hearing from you guys in the community. What's working for you and where you guys think that we can improve. So please send us your feedback. And until the next video, have a good one. Cheers.